I was thinking that maybe we could start off where the other guy kind of left off. So I believe he was saying something about beating up Nazis.
Oh yeah, I think so. Yeah. What country are you from? Just curious.
I'm Polish.
Okay.
Um, so he said some, I mean, I'd say just bullshit about how you beat up Nazis because they're Nazis, and you mentioned that how does that not allow you to just justify beating up, say, black people because they're black or whatever?
Sure.
Um, the thing is, I think the guy just phrased it badly, saying, uh, that you kind of identify that because of the political identity of a person being a Nazi, that justifies beating them up, and therefore you could use that for anyone.
Mm-hmm.
However, I would argue that it's not the political identity; it's the goals of the Nazi or the fascist movement in general as being intrinsically liberty denying, and thus I do think there is a value to defending liberty from people who want to take it away, and I think it's a
Are you
worthless liberal.
are you really defending liberty though by sucker punching people in the streets? Like, isn't this liberty that you would rather defend like in the court systems or through
I mean,
legislation or politicians?
I'm not exactly going to defend like Antifa because personally I'm not exactly for them. I think that they're generally ineffective. I'm not going to condemn them because like if a Nazi gets beat up, fuck it, I don't care. Like they deserve it, honestly. I wouldn't really be going out doing that because I don't think it's effective. But uh, if others choose to do it, then sure. And I mean, you know, Hitler himself did say that if the enemies of his movement understood it, then they would have beaten it up on day one and not let them get the legitimacy and the position they had in the political system. And I think there's some truth to that. I think that when you have something like fascism, it should really be countered and strangled in the cradle. There is very little value to respecting your political opponents. Fundamentally, it's about power. And you do have to be ruthless to a certain degree. I don't think Nazis really deserve that. And since, you're not going to really be waiting till they start genociding people.
I I
Fascism could
guess.
have been debated.
Well,
I don't think Hitler would have come to power, do you? Like, if rational argumentation could have stopped a movement like that?
yeah, but I don't think the people were in the state of mind where rational argumentation was what they wanted to hear, right? Like Germany was pretty fucked after World War One. It seemed like they were pretty receptive. Like it seems like the more fucked a country is, the more willing you are to embrace extremist ideals. I say fucked, but how about
Of
like
course,
unstable?
economic conditions, people's livelihoods affect what kind of youth are susceptible
Yeah,
to.
so I feel like I
Because,
don't feel like having people running around beating up people that are pointing this out really plays into stopping a movement at all. Like if anything, I
yeah,
feel like it.
which is why I don't support Antifa. Like, as a communist, I would prefer for people like anti-fascists to focus maybe on, I don't know, beating up capitalists or something than like irrelevant Nazis that choose to march on the street. Like they don't really do that much harm. I do think there's some value to like doing it when Nazis are a direct threat to say minorities. So say like Battle of Cable Street. Like I think there was a justified fight against Nazis there when Mosley tried to march through a Jewish neighborhood with his stormtroopers in inverted commas. Um,
So do you think that it would be okay in the United States of America if we killed everybody here that espouse socialist or communist ideals because they're in the minority? That seems like a scenario that even you wouldn't want to be in, no?
Wait, when did I say anything about killing people like who are a minority of some sort?
Well, doesn't violence inevitably point you in that direction? Like it's not
No,
just going to
there is a
stop it.
difference. There is a difference between the violence of, say, a slave owner to the slave and the violence of the slave against the slave owner. Violence is a sword. It is a tool. It can be used in multiple ways.
Yeah, but
The
what this is a big problem. I think that a lot of
the
that
liberator and the tyrant use the same sword.
Sure, sure. But this is a problem that I think a lot of class based movements have is that while you might want to analyze something as a class, the individual doesn't perceive something as a class. So when you say that there are, so for instance, when a slave uses the tool of violence against a slave owner, it's different than when the slave owner uses the tool of violence against a slave, right? You agree with that?
Yeah, that's what I was saying.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is I don't think that the individual perceives it as such, where they both perceive it similarly, even if on a class level they perceive it differently. So like as an example, a lot of white people in the United States, or well across the world, will talk about things like reverse racism. Even though racism can never really manifest itself against white people in the same way it has against other minorities, it still doesn't feel that way if you're a white person being I guess, discriminated against or made fun of because of your race.
The reverse racism thing is either just like a right-wing dog whistle, or it is a misinterpretation of the difference between prejudice and discrimination.
I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, though. So for instance, let me ask you this, okay? So if I got on Twitter right now and I tweeted out like I want to kill all niggers or whatever, right? I would probably get banned from Twitter for it, or I would get a warning or a suspension, and my thing would be right. But I could get on Twitter and I could start a movement where I do hashtag white genocide, and there's no backlash against that at all. If
Didn't some American professor recently say that?
What?
I think there was. So some American professor like tweeted something about kill all white people or white genocide.
Yeah, it's possible. But I'm saying that like as a white person reading that, how do you think that white person feels? Like I feel like they would like feel like, well, this is fucked. This is racism, right? Like
yeah, sure, but prejudice itself is, I don't think, racism. You know, Stokely Carmichael, I think, said something along the lines of, you know, if a white person wants to lynch me, that's their problem. If a white person can lynch me, that's my problem. You know, like, prejudice isn't nice, but it's not discrimination, and it's discrimination that's the problem. And I think that's what people get at, for example, when they say that racism is power and prejudice, not just prejudice.
Sure. But then you have to keep in mind as well that like white people white people are never going to reach the level of fucked that like black people were when they were slaves, right? Like, that's never going to happen. So I don't think that white people have that perspective, right? Everything that you feel and experience is relative, right? So, like for an instance, if a white person were to walk into a college, if a white person were to walk into some college classroom and people were having a discussion about, like privilege, right? And you see a lot of people on poll get like really triggered about these kinds of conversations, right? That might be the extent to which that person experiences, quote unquote racism. But to them, like it's a real thing, right? Like struggling is relative. Much the same way that maybe somebody feels really bad because they have they've got like an iPhone 4 and like the iPhone 7 is out now and they feel like a shitter, and then some people in the world don't even have food, right? I don't think it's necessarily fair to invalidate one person's feelings because their relative experience of suffering is so much different than another person's,
How did we get to this topic? I'm not really sure how it was relevant to what we were talking about in the first place.
I think we got here because you were talking about how using the tool of violence against certain groups is different than them using that tool of violence against you.
Yeah, because I don't think that it's correct to say that all violence is bad.
Yeah, sure, but then I guess to refocus that statement, I guess my problem is that. So I guess when I look for a system of morals or ethics for a civilization or for a people to live by, I would hope that that system can be applied as consistently as possible, right? That's my goal, is that you want to be as consistent as possible because the less caveats or exceptions you make, the more solid your foundation of rule is, right? So when you say something like violence against certain groups of people is okay, the problem becomes that certain groups of people and how different people make that determination. Right. Does that make sense?
I'm not sure if it does.
So let me put it this way. So tell me here, give me an explanation of who you think violence is acceptable against.
I think that violence is acceptable. I take a fairly simple view that, for the greater good, or at least that, the end justifies the means as long as something justifies the end.
Okay, so then let's say that you have a person who is very religious, okay, and they think that the family unit is one of the foundational things of all society, one of the most important things of all society. The family is the cornerstone of all business and everything, right? So this person views homosexuals as literal abominations that are destroying society. How do you tell this person that they're in the wrong for wanting to go around and punch or beat up gay people?
Well, for one, you could use violence to stop them.
Okay, but
because you could use
that's
violence
no,
to
but
stop
that's not what you
discrimination.
want to do, because in a fight of gay people versus straight people win. There's way more of us. I don't think that.
Yeah, but are you saying that this religious person who believes in the family is representative of all straight people? Like,
For a while, yes. That's why gay marriage was only within the past few years finally, I don't want to say legalized, but made illegal to make it illegal, the way that our law works. But yeah, gay marriage has been a very heated issue in the United States for a long time. Yeah.
yeah, but
Or sorry, go on.
I mean, you say that somehow the idea that different people have different views and ideas change and that you have to persuade people or fight for rights somehow invalidates the fact that violence can be used for good.
I think that violence can be used for good. I just think you have to be very, very, very careful at how you define when it's
Like, you have to
acceptable.
remember that, I know that a lot of liberal kind of perception in America and like in the Western world in general uh, perceives, for example, the idea that now black people have civil rights or women have civil rights was somehow achieved by like peaceful protest, when in fact there was a lot of violence involved, and the peaceful protest alone would have never achieved the kind of things that have been achieved for minority groups now.
Sure, but I think you could make the argument. I mean, for one, there was a lot of peaceful protesting with that. It's hard to say how much you can attribute to the violence versus how much you can attribute to the peaceful protests. But I do agree that violence probably played some role there. But in those scenarios, you were also at like last resort, right? These were people that were overturning systems of oppression that had existed for generations, right? A long time. I don't know that if you see a minority person, when I say minority, I mean minority of thought, giving some very controversial speech in the street or whatever, that it's acceptable to walk up and just beat that person up.
Well, I think that when, say, these civil liberties that we have are important to me, and when, like, the kind of culture that we have developed of, I guess, I don't know, tolerance and acceptance, you could call it, and the fact that we don't, kill ethnic minorities and shit, that when someone advocates a fascist viewpoint of, say, whether that's racial segregation or ethnic cleansing or white nationalism or whatever, I do think that it's valuable to defend that society, and you can debate them or you can beat them up. And I don't think there's anything wrong with beating them up. I don't think that makes their position stronger. Although
I mean,
don't
it
really
just
defend
it
kind of
sounds like
institution.
a might is right then kind of thing. Then the person who ends up being right is just the person with the most amount of force behind whatever they think.
No, because it has nothing to do with being correct. But it does have a lot to do with what wins.
Yeah, but I mean, like if you're in a certain area where the
And when
prevailing
you're
thought.
quite convinced that Nazis shouldn't be winning, perhaps you should actively do something to stop them winning.
I mean, I agree with the actively doing something to prevent, this kind of thing from becoming mainstream, but I feel like I would rather see that kind of thing happen in the minds of people, or maybe even in the court system if it got that far, rather than, vigilantism that can lead to so many other negatives. And then enforce this idea that like if you speak, because like maybe a neo-Nazi says some shit that's pretty extremist, and ends up getting punched, and that's fine. But I feel like you can start going down the line there. At like there are a lot of people that would consider, for instance, the example that I've used before, like Muslims to be extremist, right? These are people that shouldn't be allowed to have any thoughts whatsoever, right? And you can go down a ton of religions that are like that, where I think these people represent a threat, theocratically or whatever, to my country. So I'm going to go ahead and beat them up. Like I don't know, I just don't like the idea of endorsing that kind of behavior. It just seems bad.
Yeah, sure, I can accept that. And I mean, I don't actively intend to go up beating Nazis.
Sure, you might not, but you champion the violence. You
Yeah,
said
because I think Nazis do deserve to be beat up. I think when you hold these, and I don't think that, these, I have a pity for Nazis, frankly, I do think that they are people who are, take on these ideologies because they are in a desperate situation and they're looking for something to blame.
I guess
And
it just seems like if there comes up a scenario where you are in the streets and then a bunch of Nazis run up and punch you in the face, like I can't really feel bad for that person. Like, I mean, you got beat up. I mean, but you said that the violence is okay and that's how you want to solve your problems. Like, I mean, you
hey,
can't
if
really get
Nazis
mad if
want to
somebody
beat
walks
me
up and
up,
clocks you then.
hey, if Antifa are in the streets and they're beating up Nazis, I absolutely wouldn't hold it against them if they organized to fight us. Like,
But doesn't it?
frankly, bring it on.
That, but you say that now because Nazis are in the minority. But what if it was something like Christians versus I don't know. You sound a religious issue, like Christians versus Muslims. Would you want an all-out bloodbath in the streets or straight people versus gay people, where enough very fundamentalist straight people come out and start terrorizing gay people because they've got the majority on their side? That seems like things you don't want to happen, at least in a society where people aren't all killing each other.
I mean, you have to take it in the context of the society we live in. Frankly, you don't have these absolute rules that apply everywhere.
Yeah, but
gonna...
you're taking the society that we live in now, and now, for the most part, I agree that now we're better than we were, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago. But there are still issues that we have now, like transgendered rights are something that are very, very hotly contested, that a lot of people would like to go out and beat up fucking trannies, or whatever, go, punch them out and whatnot. And I mean, these are people that are very much in the minority. And even amongst liberal-leaning people, even in the LGBT community, there are people there that don't like transgendered people. So, like, I don't know if I would want to tell transgender people, like, well, hey, everybody for yourself. Like, if they've got more people, like, you're just going to lose the fight. I don't know. That just seems like a bad world to live in.
Well, to me, a world where fascists are free to organize is a bad world to live in, because they are exactly the kind of people who are going to be beating up, LGBT people and whatever.
Sure, and I agree with what you just said, but it sounds like you're compromising. Like, how important is are your values to protect if you're willing to compromise all of your values to protect them, if that makes sense? It's kind of like the security question. Like, our society is great because we have the ability to have freedom of thought and freedom of ideas. But if we sacrifice those freedoms to get rid of people that represent a threat to it, how did those freedoms ever matter in the first place? It's kind of a walk around, but it's the same thing as like security theater, right? Our country is great because we have freedoms to do whatever, and now in order to protect our country, we need to give up all of our freedoms to the surveillance industry, to the NSA and the CIA and everything to protect our freedoms. Well, do they really matter in the first place then if we were so willing to give them up?
Here I would take the kind of Jacobin line from Maximilien Robespierre, where, virtue without terror is impotent, terror without virtue is blind. You need to have a virtuous terror, and there's a value of that. There's no point having these values if you're not going to be terrible and brutal to enforce them. But your terror and brutality has to be virtuous and have those values behind it.
Yeah, but the virtuous and values part is so subjective, and I don't even think today I want majority society deciding what is for instance, do you think that if your thought was applied 150 years ago, like, black people would still have nothing, right? Or women's suffrage, I think, was in the very early 1900s in the United States. Like, women still wouldn't be allowed to vote, right? How would anybody ever budge you from your position if you're saying that you can enforce these things with ruthless measures?
Wait, what? Sorry?
So if you were to go back a few hundred years and somebody like you still existed then and said that it's okay to use violence to convince people that we believe we're right, wouldn't you perpetually keep these people, like, I guess, in fucked positions, people that we now agree shouldn't be, like minorities or women?
I mean, people with the kind of views that I express did exist back then, and they did fight for the kind of things that I would presume to fight today, if that's what you're asking.
Well, but don't you think the people that if you existed back then, don't you think you would be a little bit more likely to take the side of the slave owner? Or do you
yeah, sure. Like, the society we grow up in shapes the kind of person we are and has a profound influence on that.
So wouldn't it be good to have some kind of like built-in protections to your way of rule so that you don't have majorities that are oppressing minorities via violence?
These protections always serve to entrench the system in which they were developed. Like, the idea of some constitutional liberal democracies generally serves to precisely entrench the kind of system in which they were conceived.
But it sounds like you're the one that wants to do the entrenchment by saying that the majority thought here can use violence against a minority of thought. Isn't that the definition of entrenchment?
I'm not saying majority of thought has the right. I'm saying the majority of thought always does this, and where we are the majority, we should do this, because we should do what is right and what we believe to be right. I don't hold it against anyone to follow their beliefs. We don't choose our beliefs. Our beliefs are in some way enforced onto us. And everyone has a right, in inverted commas, to pursue their beliefs. And as a communist, I will pursue communist beliefs. And Nazis are free to pursue Nazi beliefs, and we'll meet and fight. And as history has always gone, one side will win eventually. And there's no blueprint for this society which doesn't have conflict in it that you seem to be advocating. If we just have the right protections and respect each other's freedom of speech, somehow we'll have this stability. I don't think that's true.
Gotcha. I feel like I don't know. I mean, I guess I could be wrong as well. I don't know. I feel like society is different now than it used to be. But I guess you're saying that violence is essentially inevitable when you have clashing groups of people, and that, I guess to some extent you have an obligation to your belief or ideology to perpetuate it, even if through violence. Is that kind of what you're?
Sorry, I was just checking the lefty call thread.
Oh, so I guess your argument then is that violence is something that has existed and will always exist in history, and you kind of have a responsibility to your.
No, I think that all violence is the result of, in society there is always or almost always a fundamental struggle between people who have differing interests, differing beliefs. Those beliefs generally based on their differing interests.
Mm-hmm.
And generally, in the societies that we have seen in the past of human history, you have different groups with different interests, which generally conflict with each other. They don't want the same things, and as a result, they fight. And that's really, that kind of fight generally leads us in the direction of how history progresses, in simple terms.
So you think it's impossible to encourage people that live within the same nation to have, civil discourse with one another, that's a fruitless endeavor, that you should always instead just move towards violence?
As long as people have differing interests, you're not going to stop them. There's no level of persuasion at which you're going to persuade the little
I mean,
guy
I've never had
the
desire to go out and punch somebody out before. I mean, I've heard some pretty extreme stuff. I don't know.
I mean, maybe you're not getting fucked over as hard, or you don't know how hard you're getting fucked over. There is no level of persuasion, I don't think. And no, that's not exactly correct. If we take the classic slave-master relationship,
Mm-hmm.
you have, you can persuade the slave and the master that they can get along.
Sure.
You can. In that relation, and you have the kind of Uncle Tom character.
Sure. I think that for slave master stuff, I feel like it's fundamentally a bit different, because in slave master stuff you have somebody actually, like, you've moved past like giving thought or idea, and you're actually actively physically oppressing somebody, right? Like keeping somebody as an actual physical slave. Like I feel like at that point you've moved into a slightly different territory.
I think that in our modern society, we have progressed from the kind of slave-master relationship in most places. There's still, slavery around in places, but we have moved on from that. But we still have those kind of relationships. They're simply far more subtle.
Sure. But I think that the subtlety of them means that they're also capable of being addressed in different ways, like via socioeconomic means, via economic policy, via policy at schools or workplaces, or stuff like this. I don't feel like it. I don't know. I guess I can't think of many problems today, at least in the United States, that need to be solved via violence, or that even can effectively be solved via violence. Sorry, go ahead.
I can think of one, and that's the institution of private property.
Shit. Okay, we're getting really extreme. Yeah, that would probably take violence to solve it, but I don't think that I don't think that the prevailing American thought would mean that communists would win in that type of fight.
I mean, prevailing American thought, it's not impossible. America had a very lively communist movement back in the day.
Which one? Or what?
If you look at around World War I and before, the IWW had a very prominent presence. When the October Revolution broke out in at the time Russian Empire, there was a lot of worry that a revolution would break out in the United States. During the Great Depression, the communist movement was very active in the United States, and the New Deal was, at least in part, an attempt by the American ruling class to address some of the economic distress and try and stop a revolutionary uprising. So, it's not something that's unprecedented in America. It's all down to material conditions. And, as the economic situation gets worse, as it is getting worse, you're going to see, currently also we're seeing both in Europe, in America, the Western world in general, a resurgence in a kind of right-wing populism, which tries to address some of these economic problems, some of these issues that people see in their lives, their decreasing quality of life, etc. And I think that equally we will see a resurgence in a kind of radical left-wing thought.
You don't think? I mean, does that really speak to the efficacy of like communism taking hold in people's minds, or isn't it more just people looking at like a kind of like the grass is greener type of thing? Like, for instance, in the United States, I guess during the New Deal era, we were looking more towards left-leaning policies. I say left-leaning, I don't know, but more towards socialist kind of policies for wealth redistribution. Sure. Well, just talking economically, like wealth redistributive kind of things, right? But that's because we were very capitalist at the time. No, couldn't you argue that in a lot of European places now you're looking at the opposite? For instance, like Brexit was kind of an exit of a larger centralized market into a more of an individual kind of capitalist thing, or no?
Yeah, but it's just one capitalism for another. I'm just going to quickly interject here to prevent any misconceptions. There is no socialism is not when government does stuff.
Okay,
And
I guess
when if you look at European economies, they are not socialist; they are absolutely capitalist.
Okay, yeah. So just because I don't have any formal education there, I guess when I think of socialism, I generally think of things like wealth redistribution. Is that accurate?
No, that's absolutely no. It's not really about wealth redistribution. Like welfare, for example, and the idea of benefits has very little to do with socialist ideas.
Okay, when you say socialist ideas, what's meant by that then? I'm sorry, because I don't actually know.
Socialist ideas are ones that generally there's a broad variety of socialist ideas that range from generally get subdivided into two sections: anarchist and Marxist. Broadly, there's some outliers which people are going to get upset at me about, but whatever. Where socialism, first of all, is not like, I'm assuming that you probably think that socialism is like soft communism or like
No. I think communism and socialism are two entirely separate things, right? Communism is no private property, workers own the means of the productions and all of that for the most part, right?
Socialism is worker ownership of the means of production.
Okay, I have no idea. My bad.
Did someone just say that I'm an anarcho-communist in the chat? I'm not.
But don't worry about chat. Chat is full of retards.
But what was I saying? Oh yes. So socialism is worker ownership of the means of production. Communism has generally been defined as a society which is classless, moneyless, and stateless. The stateless and classless are the most important parts.
When you say classless, you're talking socioeconomic as well, I'm assuming?
The idea of class is, class in Marxist terms is one's relationship to the means of production, so one's position in the productive process. So an owner of a factory has a different class than the worker in a factory, simply put. These are generally expressed as capitalist and proletarian.
Gotcha.
So socialism is sometimes seen as an intermediary stage between communism and capitalism, although admittedly Marx and Engels use them interchangeably. There's like no difference in how they use them. So when someone says that Europe has like a socialist economic model, especially with what happened in America recently with Bernie Sanders and the whole democratic socialist thing, yeah, that's bullshit. He's not a democratic socialist at all. Maybe privately, but definitely his policies were not.
So can you give me some examples? When you say socialist policies, like what would some examples of this be?
Socialist policies in the economy, which is the only place where you can genuinely have socialist policies since it only applies to economics.
Sure.
It would be worker ownership. So according to some leftist theorists, say co-ops, like cooperatively owned businesses. where all the workers have a share in the company and own it collectively, and democratically determine what the company does.
Okay.
So there's no owner, and the workers are not just employees; they're also all owners.
Is there any other type of socialist policy, or is that like what everything comes down to? Is ownership of the means of
I mean,
production?
you're gonna get here into like the 10 billion sects of socialist thought, where you have, there's market socialists who believe that, you have this socialist economy with worker ownership of the means of production that operates within a market. There are syndicalists who believe that the economy should be more kind of through decentralized planning managed by syndicates, i.e., trade unions. There's central planning advocates who think that you should have an entity which, through central planning assigns resources to communities.
When you talk about things like
Right.
private property, is that compatible with socialism or no?
Private property. I'm gonna not go out on a whim here and ask you what you think private property means. Just so
Citizens owning, I guess, like homes or private property, like not publicly owned but privately owned, and then you have your own access to it.
This is a common misconception as well. When Marxists, and this is not like, oh, Marxists use this. This is like actual terminology that was used like ever since capitalism became a thing in like the 17th century. Private property refers to productive property, i.e., what in economics you would generally call capital.
Oh, okay.
At least, not like variable capital, but constant capital. So factory machines, are
Stores and
capital.
stuff would be considered.
Yeah, natural resources. So when we say no private property, we mean like no private individuals, and for that matter, no state entities, no like government owning natural resources or productive property. When we talk about things like houses or communists aren't coming for your fucking toothbrush, we would refer to that as personal property, and that's completely fine, and like no one's coming to take that away.
Gotcha. Well, I don't think in America you guys aren't taking anything away, right? We're all capitalists.
Well,
I'm just
no,
wondering.
actually, like 1% of you are, 0.5% of you are capitalists, and then the rest of you are proles.
Is that whatever system of capitalism we use now or whatever? What does it mean by proles? What do you mean by that?
Proles just short for proletarians, as in working class.
Oh, so people that don't really know what they're just kind of along for the ride?
No, people who work for a wage and don't extract their wealth from the work of others. So if you work a job for a wage, you're a proletarian.
Gotcha.
If you pay out wages to others, then you make your wealth of the produce of other people's work, you're a capitalist.
Oh, sick. Okay. So when I pay my YouTube guy to do videos for me, does that make me a capitalist? Because he's producing wealth for me via the ad revenue I make off of my YouTube videos?
Well, that depends. Is he like effectively on contract work?
Kind
Because
of, yeah.
if he's a self-employed, then no,
Oh, fuck.
then he falls outside the class binary.
Okay. well, I
There
tried.
are more minor classes, but they're generally not large enough parts of society to be cared to account for in a class analysis.
Gotcha.
So like,
I guess, or I'm not sure if you're aware of it, just to explain maybe where that confusion comes in. In the United States, when we talk about like public or private property, it's always citizen-owned versus government-owned, I guess.
yeah.
So I'd
Yeah,
always
that's-
assume that's what I meant.
that's the same thing in Europe. Like, it's just that. I would make a distinction between, you have private property, i.e., the ownership of private enterprise. You have public or state property, and then you have what I would call social property, which would be property that is productive property owned by the workers in a socialist manner. And communists or
Play
socialists don't like
TLOS,
want
pleb.
government ownership of all
Heavy.
the businesses and stuff. Like,
What do you, here, I'm curious about this, just because I really don't know much about alternative economic
Sorry,
forms.
for one moment, my cat wants to leave the room and I need to open the door.
Oh, sure thing.
Okay, back.
What Oh fuck! I totally just lost my train of thought.
No problem.
We were just talking about the difference between public and private.
Yeah.
Fuck! I'll remember it in a little bit.
Is my cat a commie fucker too? Well, my cat is actually a Russian blue, so possibly.
Where were you? Where do you live in Poland?
I don't live in Poland.
Oh, you're just Polish. Okay. Where do you live?
London.
Oh, gotcha. Were you raised in Poland at all?
Yeah.
Gotcha. I lived in Warsaw for 3 months. I was just curious. Well, I guess is there anything else? I'm not really equipped to have like a discussion on the validity of different economic models. I don't have like an educational background in any of this, so I can't really.
No, I mean, I don't think. Frankly, I think a lot of the education in economics and whatever business studies or whatever is frankly designed to keep a lot of people away from a genuine. And I think a lot of people who are in that kind of education don't really know because.
Oh, I remember what I was going to ask. What? Okay, I'm curious. So when you talk about workers owning the means of productions and the factories being publicly owned, you say that you don't want them owned by the government or socially owned. Yeah, you say you don't want them owned by a state or a government entity. What do you call the body of people then that come together to own the whatever factory? How do you delegate responsibility or power to them?
Democratically, I would say.
So
democracy in the form of sort of participatory democracy, where the basic principle is, nothing about us without us. The people involved in a decision will be making that decision.
Gotcha. So when you elect people, I'm an American, okay? So because when I think of electing people and democracy, I'm thinking forms of government. What do you call the body of people? Is this not a type of state, or do you have like a different designation for it, or?
A state generally means a fairly specific thing. Now, communists or socialists or anarchists, whatever you want to call those people who fall within my general spectrum of ideology, you can have a government. It's just not supposed to be a state.
Okay, so kind of like if you have a corporation, if you've got a board of electors and you take votes on things, that's not necessarily a state or a government. It's just a public kind of board for like a company, like something like that.
I mean, it's a government of sorts within, if you call like the company as a group of people a community. But yeah, it's not a state. A state is generally defined as an institution with a monopoly on the use of force or violence. And we're kind of against that because in Marxist theory, at least Leninist theory, the state is fundamentally an instrument of class power.
Okay, well, what if one of the people that owned your factory that was democratically elected came out as a neo-Nazi and you used force against him then? Would you be a state?
Oh, I'm not really in... the democracy that I was talking about is certainly not a representative democracy.
Gotcha. No, I'm just giving you a hard time. I'm just messing with you.
And even in the case of a representative democracy, it's more likely to be delegated in response than purely representative. So a delegate could be recalled at any time. So.
Gotcha.
Yeah, but any other questions? Or maybe we should move to a slightly different topic than property?
Yeah, I mean, I guess we can. I don't think I have any. Like I said, I'm not really equipped to have like a detailed breakdown on economic philosophy or anything, so if you want to move on, that's fine.
I know, I'm gonna just quickly check Lefty Poll, maybe they've got something to suggest.
Is there a lefty poll on 4chan, or is the 8chan community just larger for them?
8chan. It's just 8chan, there's no Lefty Poll on 4chan.
Why is there no community on 4chan? I'm just curious. I don't actually know why.
I think it's because there's you can't set up boards there.
Okay.
And like lefty pole came out of like the exodus from 8-pole anyway.
Gotcha.
No, but like they literally have no good ideas, so whatever. I'll think of something quickly. A lot of the time you see, especially, I mean, I speak from experience with poll types. There's this conflation of leftists, as in communists, and liberals, where you have this vague idea that and it all comes down to like the kind of stuff like Obama as a commie or a socialist or whatever. Or that like Hillary supporters are communists, or that communists support Hillary, whichever way around you want to put it.
Sure.
And this idea that comes from the right that liberals have anything in common with leftists, when we really don't.
I think
And
one of the
this is a
big
lot.
problems is that like all of these terms get so widely used and misused and branded and rebranded that I don't even know if there's like I don't even know if like academically, or maybe academically there's like agreed upon usages of these things, but like because there's like you've got liberals, you've got neoliberals, you've got classical liberals, you've got liberalism, you've got libertarian, like, and all of these things mean different things depending on who you talk to even.
It's a lot to do with the fact that America has developed their own sort of political vocabulary,
Sure.
where you have this idea of liberals and conservatives, which is frankly baffling. So, like, when I use the term liberal, I generally mean it as a classical liberal.
Gotcha.
So,
and I'm not even sure what that
support-
actually means.
A classical liberal generally means someone who advocates for, private property rights and capitalism, generally some amount of free markets and individual liberties.
Okay. If you were to put these on a political spectrum, then a liberal would be on the opposite side as a.
Spectrums are like cancer.
Okay. Well, I'm just to get an idea that these people would be very different than say communists or socialists, right? Okay. I don't want to say. I guess I don't want to use the term opposite, but.
And the problem is that what in American politics comes across as liberals, i.e., like Obama or Hillary or whatever, what comes across as conservatives, so like your Republicans, your Ted Cruz's, your Marco Rubio's, your Trumps, and what comes across as your socialists, so Bernie Sanders, or I don't know who else.
It depends on who you talk to. Every Democrat is a socialist, communist. If you talk to somebody on the right of the political spectrum in the United States, so.
Yeah, but all of these four are liberals, like
in the classical sense, right?
Yeah, like your most hardline Republican is a liberal, and your Bernie Sanders is a liberal.
Gotcha. Okay.
And I mean, sure, like you have your conservatives and you have your social democrats, but they all fundamentally support capitalism. So really, from like a perspective as a communist, there's like no difference.
Okay.
And we oppose all of them.
Gotcha.
Like the only distinction that we really would care to make is between communists, liberals, and fascists. And then, of course, the 10 billion subdivisions of leftist thought where we attack each other for petty things because we can't agree on some minor theoretical differences. So this just leads to constant liberals just completely misinterpreting our views. And it doesn't help that we have very little consistency amongst each other and tend to attack each other more than we attack our actual ideological opposition.
Just curious. I'm sure you get asked this a lot, so you should have a prepared response, I imagine. Why do you think that like communism or socialism hasn't had these massive states in the same way that capitalism has? What's like
I
been the
mean,
principal failure?
come on, like when talking about massive states, you don't get more massive than the Soviet Union.
Well, but is that the example that you want to use as your most successful socialist state?
I mean, it wasn't a socialist state, but it was certainly run by socialists for at least some of the time.
Yeah, but couldn't you argue that the whole Cold War was literally like a dick waving contest between capitalism and socialism or communism, and that capitalism kind of came out on top? Why would you attribute, or would you attribute Russia's losses or the Soviet Union's losses to something more than their form of economy? Or
Um, well, I would say that first of all, the economy of the Soviet Union went through a number of different stages,
mm-hmm.
with what I would describe as socialism, as in genuine worker ownership of the process of production and the management of the economy in the first couple of months after the October Revolution, due to the fact that in the wake of the revolution and just prior to it, the workers did in fact seize their workplaces and establish what were called Soviets, hence the name of the Soviet Union, which is just the Russian word for a council, i.e. councils of workers which managed their workplaces, which managed a substantial part of the economy, as well as peasants in the countryside seizing farms and forming their own collective farms. Unfortunately, Russia underwent a civil war after the revolution when the supporters of the Tsar wanted to retake power. And you had the civil war with the Reds against the Whites, and of course the foreign interventionists when America and a bunch of other Western nations invaded the young Soviet Union to try and squash it immediately. Something that isn't surprisingly isn't really taught in schools, I find. And as a result, the Soviet Union was forced to implement a policy called war communism, which was pretty much just all the resources go to the army because we need the army to protect ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And army takes absolute priority. The war was won by the Soviet Union, and it re-established itself with territorial losses, notably modern Belarus, significant parts of Poland, the Baltic countries, etc., parts of Finland. However, as it re-established itself, a policy was put in place called the NEP, or New Economic Policy, which was supposed to effectively introduce limited capitalism, or limited free market capitalism with private owners, to try and boost the economy. And this remained in place for a couple of years. However, a majority of the economy became increasingly state-owned as state capitalism set in. State capitalism being when there is private property, but rather than being owned by private individuals, it's owned by the state. And the Soviet Union maintained this policy for most of its history from then on, until you get to Khrushchev, who tried to implement some reforms, slightly adjusting it, and then eventually with Gorbachev implementing broad market reforms and the liberalization of the economy, which eventually led to the downfall of the Soviet Union. So the Soviet Union certainly was not socialist, even if it was run by socialists. However, nonetheless, it has a truly historic record of success in many fields.
How long did the Soviet Union exist for?
From 1917 till 1991.
Okay.
Well, actually, not 1917. 1917 was the revolution. The country was officially established in, I want to say 1922. Might be 1923. I'm not sure. Someone's going to attack me for this.
Gotcha. All right. Well, cool shit. Do you have any final words?
We're coming, buckos.
Do what?
We're coming, buckos.
Oh, never mind. I heard you. Gotcha. Do you really think so? I feel like that's not gonna happen. I don't really like the ideas of publicly owned shit. I'm not gonna lie.
It's not publicly owned. It's socially
Or
owned.
I'm sorry, socially owned. Of socially owned. Or maybe I guess I'm a fan of capitalism. I mean, I've kind of been brainwashed in the system though for the past 28 years of my life. So I would probably it would take me a lot of time to reconsider a totally different system.
Maybe you will reconsider once the harsh economic conditions of the next economic crash set in. I don't know. Maybe.
Yeah, well, but I don't know. I mean, the United States has been pretty tenacious. I mean, it's existed as a liberal country for 200 some years. No.
Yeah, capitalism in general has existed for that long. You know, feudalism lasted for what? 800 years, 900 years?
Mm-hmm.
Slave-based imperial societies lasted for thousands of years. You know, each society, each mode of production eventually ends.
Oof. All right. Well, hey, I appreciate the conversation. I learned some
Yeah,
stuff.
I've got to go anyway now.
Yeah. Thanks a
Yeah.
lot. Good luck. Be careful with your Russian cat.
Bye.
Have fun. I'll see you later.